JD Vance denies that Trump's tariffs would be a tax on Americans. Oh, God.
Senator JD
God, why does he look like this?
Vance, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us here in Cincinnati. Let's start off with the Democratic National Convention.
Sure.
Some of what we heard this past week, Vice President Kamala Harris, in making her case, said that the tariff plans that Donald Trump is proposing will hurt the middle class. Here's what she said specifically, quote,
Sure.
He intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle class families by almost $4,000 a year. Now, the estimates vary, but how do you respond to that charge that Trump's tariffs would hurt the middle class?
Yeah, so if you step back a little bit, Kristen, there's this whole thing that Kamala Harris did at the convention where she made a bunch of claims about what would happen and not enough actually reflection on what already happened, right? Because Donald Trump was already president.
Yes, and he implemented taxes in an attempt at engaging in a trade war with China, and it increased prices domestically so much so that they had to increase subsidies for farmers, and it got a portion of his own voter base really angry with him because they had to bail them out because they started suffering really badly under the increased costs.
Use tariffs to bring manufacturing jobs back to our country, and I think he'll do it again.
That's not how that works. Tariffs on their own don't bring manufacturing back in. They just raise prices. You need a complex web of policies to bring stuff back home. Like, it's a global economy, man. If you make it impossible to sell stuff to Americans, they'll just sell it to the Chinese, you know?
And he did it while keeping prices extremely low. Because if you go back to the Trump presidency, we had 12,000 factories that were built during Donald Trump's presidency. Inflation never really ticked above 2%.
12,000? What are we counting, like lemonade stands as a factory for producing lemonade? We lost manufacturing jobs under Trump.
His entire administration, in fact, was sort of, around 1.5% most of the time that he was president. So when Kamala Harris says, if we do the thing that Trump already did, it's going to be way worse than it was last time, I just don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, let's talk about
Sure.
Trump's record during his first term. He did impose rounds of tariffs.
They were disastrous. Remember articles like these? This was the beginning of my channel. Trump tariff aid to farmers cost more than U.S. nuclear forces. The tariffs were so destructive. The subsidies that he had to roll out were like economically ruinous. Like he really, really f***ed over people. It's not good.
And it cost Americans nearly $80 billion in new taxes. Do you acknowledge that imposing more tariffs will ultimately cost consumers?
92% of Trump's China tariff proceeds has gone to bail out angry farmers. We love our good economic policy, don't we, folks? Total tariff revenue from 2018 to 2020, and then these are relief payments to farmers. It's like all of it. Like all of it just immediately went back. And we still had to pay higher consumer prices during this time. It was just a flat economic loss. I hate farmers so much. No, this isn't the farmers' fault. For once, they're the victims here. They had a regular operation going, and then Trump wanted to antagonize China, so he was like, well, actually, we're going to tariff stuff that our supply chains rely on, and then the farmers suffer, and he's like, all right, time to bail them out, and it didn't work.
So what it really does is it penalizes importers from bringing goods outside the country into the country. And I think that's just a necessary thing. We know that China and a number of other countries are using effectively slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers. Donald Trump thinks that has to stop. And again,
you don't give a shit. You don't give a shit about worker conditions. F you. There are a million policies you could push if you gave a shit. You don't give a shit. Don't. Your party is literally like paving the way for fewer worker protections, fewer unions, weaker unions, and child labor in our country.
What Kamala Harris is saying, Kristen, is that if you do this, you're somehow going to cause skyrocketing inflation. In reality, Donald Trump already did it. He brought a lot of jobs back, and it didn't cause inflation.
But
he didn't bring jobs back. It increased domestic costs, and the main reason it didn't contribute broadly to inflation is because the tariffs that Trump issued were in specific sectors rather than all goods. Remember, Trump wants to tariff everything. The last time he issued tariffs, they were more targeted. This time it's like a 10, 15, 20% tariff on everything. All global imports. Do you have any idea how much this would f the economy? This would be ruinous beyond belief, like incomprehensibly so.
It caused consumers to pay more. They paid more in taxes, $80 billion worth. Do you acknowledge that consumers ultimately will pay more if there are more tariffs
So
imposed.
economists,
Do you just acknowledge that?
No, I don't, Kristen, because I think economists really disagree about the effects of tariffs.
They don't. No, economists across the board are against tariffs. In developed countries like ours, where we have the ability to kind of control our own import and export base, we're not like a developing country where all of our economy is selling oil on the global market or whatever. You know, we have a lot of control over how we engage with others economically. Tariffs are just a bad idea.
Because there can be a dynamic effect, right? So what some economists will say is what you just said, that it will actually raise costs for consumers. But what other people say, and I think the record supports what this other view, is that it causes this dynamic effect where more jobs come into the country. Anything that you lose on the tariff from the perspective of the consumer, you gain in higher wages. So you're ultimately much better off. You have more take-home pay.
That's not how it works. The corporations will just pay the tariff and then charge you more. They aren't going to build all these factories in America to avoid the tariff, because even if they built the factories in America, they still get other parts from the supply line from other countries. Do you have any idea how impossible it is to be like, oh yeah, I want to start a business in America. I'm going to make sure every single item on the supply chain only operates in America. Like, you know, not only like will the factory be here, the steel has to be here and all the individual parts and the semiconductors and all of it. All of it has to be built here, and all the things that are built here have to be manufactured here, and all the things that are manufactured here have to be constructed from supplies that were extracted here. And it's like, holy shit, we live in a global economy, man.
You have better jobs, and also we have more reliance, because one of the things we learned during COVID, I don't, by the way, blame Democrats for this, but one of the things we learned during COVID, Kristen, is that if our supply chains are really brittle, if we depend on the Chinese to make too much of our stuff, then prices can skyrocket at a time of crisis. The economists who say that tariffs are bad, they don't.
That's true, but tariffs don't fix that. If you want to build a strong economic production base, that's probably a good thing, but tariffs aren't how you do it. You do it by building a strong domestic... You know what the number one thing they could do? The number one thing they could do is crack down on the ability for American corporations to take their jobs elsewhere. Not tariffs, where you're taxing goods that are brought into the country, but policies that say, hey, if you're an American business and you want to sell here in America, you have to have a certain portion of your manufacturing or your construction or something here in America. Otherwise, you don't get to do business here, motherfucker. And there are versions of a policy like that that could be an economic gift. But do you know why that's never going to happen? Because the bourgeoisie do not want that. They want that less than anything else. They will kill you and everyone to stop that from happening. The exporting of the domestic slave labor base into the foreign slave labor base is the maybe largest benefit to globalization from the perspective of the economic elite. It is worth trillions to them. They will not let it happen. But if you wanted to fix this, that's how you do it.
Take that into account, and we've all learned it the hard way.
And it is economists across the board, really. I mean, the Wall Street Journal says economic data showed that Donald Trump's trade war with China did not achieve its objectives of reversing the declines in U.S. manufacturing or reshoring factory jobs. I hear what you're saying. It's a complicated picture, but just on that bottom line point, you can't guarantee that Americans won't wind up paying a penny more, can you?
Well, I think that what you can guarantee is that if you...
Why do they want this? I think that this tariff kind of falls in line with Republican policy on climate change, which is, if you're thinking objectively, it benefits nobody, literally nobody, but they're kind of in it to win it, you know? Hey, sometimes you just have to make life worse for everyone, okay? I really do think this kind of escapes the general, like, oh, well, this benefits the upper class or whatever, and we're reaching into the, like, you know, baby with a hammer smashing a control panel kind of thing.
Don't bring more manufacturing jobs back into this country. You don't make our supply chains more stable. You're going to cause higher prices over the long term. I think that is what is absolutely true.
But you acknowledge they could wind up paying more.
What I acknowledge, Kristen, is that unless we bring more manufacturing jobs back to this country, we are going to end up paying more in the long term. Remember, the whole promise, again, this was a bipartisan thing. My own party was as wrong about it as Democrats were, and Donald Trump was right about it. What they said is that if you shipped all of our manufacturing to East Asia and to Mexico, Americans would pay lower prices. Well, here we are now, and Americans are paying higher prices, and just...
That's objectively incorrect. Consumer prices have gone down massively down. There's of incredibly direct correlation between we've moved all of our manufacturing to China or Mexico or whatever else and the cost of goods going down. Not in all industries, but in a lot of them, yeah, goods are very cheap right now.
One more thing on this, Kristen, because it's really important to go at what Kamala Harris actually said in her convention speech. She says that she wants to stand up to China on behalf of American workers. If you're not willing to impose tariffs on companies that are manufacturing in China using slave labor in China, you're not standing up to the Chinese, and Americans are really going to suffer.
And on
that's not how you stand up to the Chinese. It just isn't. That's not how that works.
Pricing and prices right now, inflation obviously at its lowest level since 2021. But let's move on. Robert F. Kennedy, the big news yesterday.
Very big news.
He suspended his campaign, announced he's endorsing Donald Trump. He is also known as someone who has blamed vaccines for autism, antidepressants for school shootings, and recently said, quote, he won't take sides on what happened on 9/11. Do you have any hesitation about accepting his endorsement?
No, Chris, and I don't, because we're going to disagree on issues, right? There are things that Robert Kennedy has said that I disagree with. I'm sure there are things that he said, or that I've said, excuse me, that he's going to disagree with. But I think what his endorsement represents...
She's killing it. This is actually good journalism. Yeah, it's nice.
Is that Donald J. Trump's Republican Party is a big tent party. I was raised by two grandparents who are sort of classic blue dog Democrats. They believed in having a border. They believed that, you shouldn't have censorship in the United States of America. They believed in common sense economic policies. They may have disagreed.
Common sense economic policy, like a total import tariff. Yeah.
Agreed with Donald Trump about tax policy, but they believed in some fundamental American values. And I think what RFK's endorsement really shows is that the Kennedy Democrats are actually more at home in the Republican Party of Donald.
RFK Jr. isn't the Kennedy Democrats. That's not a real thing. The Kennedy Democrats, that was the 1960s. That's not a thing anymore. Look at how desperate they are to try to make RFK Jr. like the legacy of the old Democrat. They're like, well, this actually shows that the constituency of the Democrats, the Kennedy Democrat. What Kennedy Democrat? That's not a thing anymore. He's been completely denounced by his own family. He's a crank largely supported by Republicans. Ah, yes, this, something like 10, 20 million Democrats, the Kennedy Democrats, yeah. When you're planted psyop of a spoiler candidate ends up being too right-wing and doesn't appeal to enough left-leaning people.
Trump. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris's party, higher prices, doing nothing to fight back against the Chinese, to say nothing of a wide open border. That is not JFK's Democratic Party. It's not RFK's Democratic Party. We're thrilled to have the Kennedy Democrats where they belong.
Well, and some in the Kennedy family have stepped forward to say that they sharply disagree with this endorsement. But let's just go back very quickly. He says he isn't taking sides on 9/11. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, of course I don't agree with that, Kristen. Now, to be clear, I don't know what RFK actually said there. Maybe there was additional context. Of course, you actually have to see what people say before you agree or disagree with it. I certainly have taken sides in 9/11. I'm the pro-America side. I don't think that we should have been attacked, and I certainly think hitting back against the terrorists was justified. I don't know what RFK...
Haven't you said the Iraq war was a mistake? What do you mean by that? I know that obviously the invasion of Iraq wasn't us hitting back against the terrorists, but what do you mean by that is what I mean.
Said there. But what I do know is that RFK said a lot of very interesting and important things. That the Democratic Party has become too pro-censorship. That the Democratic Party, especially in the wake of COVID, became really anti-freedom and anti-child.
Wow, it's crazy. It really is crazy. Even he, whose job it is to sell RFK as a component of the big ticket party, the only thing he can throw out there is here's a position RFK Jr. is firm on that the Democrats are bad on is... you shouldn't be able to ban people on Twitter for lying about COVID. That's literally it. Quickly, say one thing about RFK Jr. that isn't about vaccine skepticism or draw 20. Holding 20 additional cards,
Good Democrats saying that we should be masking toddlers in their schools, even though we knew it caused...
Toddlers don't go to school. Good try. Nice try. Toddlers, roll around and cry and poop. They don't go to school.
Developmental disabilities. I agree with RFK that was crazy.
Well, to be fair, there was a lot of information that scientists were grappling with as it came in, and masks were perceived to stop the spread of the disease. Let's move on.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
But the one thing before we move on that I would say on that is there...
Is that fair? Wait, how? What do you mean, is that fair? You can't simultaneously say our medical officials were crazy for being cautious and recommending people mask up, and then also say, oh, totally fair. Yeah, for sure. They were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. How do you parse that? You can't totally fair that.
were important leaders. Donald Trump was among them. RFK was among them, who were saying some of this stuff is crazy. And if we had listened to them, I think our kids would have been much better off in the wake of the pandemic.
How would they have been better off? They wouldn't have had to wear a mask? I say toughen up. I say they're bitches, personally. Oh, they have to wear a mask in school? Oh, that's crazy, you know? 100 years ago, and you would have been crawling through the still moving gears of a loom in Philadelphia. They would have used your tiny body to unwind little strands of cotton that got caught in the machinery, you know? If you died in there, your parents would have gotten 50 cents. You can deal with a mask.
I mean, scientists did show that masks help to stop the spread of the disease. Let's talk about another big issue.
Disabilities for toddlers, right? We have to be able to balance this stuff. And I think the way that RFK struck that balance was much smarter, unfortunately, than the way that Kamala Harris did.
Let's talk about another...
Yeah, the balance of we need to investigate Dr. Fauci. I'm starting to think that the endorsement from RFK is going to end up being more damaging to the Republicans than I initially thought, just because they're now put in a position where they have to defend some of the crazier stuff that he said.
Big issue that was talked about at the Democratic National Convention. It's being talked about on the campaign trail. Abortion.
Sure.
Democrats made the case this week and beyond this week that Donald Trump, if elected, will impose a federal ban on abortion if he wins. Now, Donald Trump says he won't, but can you commit, Senator, sitting right here with me today, that if you and Donald Trump are elected, that you will not impose a federal ban on abortion?
I can absolutely commit that, Kristen, and Donald Trump has been as clear about that as possible. I think it's important.
Me when I lie.
To step back and say, what has Donald Trump actually said on the abortion question, and how is it different from what Kamala Harris and the Democrats have said? Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If Kamala...
No, he doesn't. He's taken credit for ending Roe v. Wade. He directly took credit for it. He said, I did that. That was his words.
Excuse me. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California, and California has to respect Ohio. Donald Trump...
That was already the law. States already had the ability to make their own laws with regards to abortion. Roe v. Wade didn't set the law for every state. It just made laws banning abortion unconstitutional. That was already a thing.
Trump's view is that we want the individual states and their individual cultures and their unique political sensibilities to make these decisions, because we don't want to have a nonstop federal conflict over this issue. The federal government ought to be focused on getting food.
There was no nonstop federal conflict. Roe v. Wade was decided decades ago. You guys are the ones who never shut the fuck up about it. And this is the same states' rights argument that racists made about slavery and civil rights. Like, oh, well, we'll turn it over to the states. It was already law. Well, it was already constitutional jurisprudence, but you know, it was already done. It is possible at this point that they realize the abortion thing has been so ruinous to them politically that they don't attempt to publicly push for a national abortion ban. But we already know they plan on ending American democracy anyway, so it's possible that past a point, the frustration of the public won't be a relevant factor in their decision-making.
Prices down and getting housing prices down. Issues, of course, where Kamala Harris has been a total disaster. So
how are you going to get housing prices down? When does Trump even talk about that?
I think Donald Trump is right. We want the federal government to focus on these big economic and immigration questions. Let the states figure out their own abortion policy.
It was already decided.
Just follow up with you a little bit on that point, because I've been talking to Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham just last week, who've made it very clear that if Donald Trump is elected, if you are elected, they will continue to press this point. Senator Graham said to me, I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban. If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's...
Lindsey Graham rocks so much. He's been on this one for years, and it is genuinely so destructive to the Republican Party. Like, Lindsey Graham multiple times has fronted the national abortion ban issue, even when other Republicans were like, shut the fuck up, shh, you know?
Desk. Would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the president of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly that he would. And
I don't think he's ever said explicitly he would. He said that to you?
Lindsey Graham, Kristen, I would be surprised. I mean, again, I need to see the context on what Lindsey Graham said, because Lindsey Graham himself has not advocated a federal abortion ban. Lindsey Graham has advocated a federal minimum standard. Now, to be clear, that is not Donald Trump's view. Donald Trump disagrees with Lindsey Graham on this, but no Republican, at least no Republican with any reasonable power, is saying that we should have a complete national abortion ban. I haven't heard that from any of my colleagues. And to be clear,
don't read Project 2025 then.
Trump, I think, is
Also, don't look what Republicans are pushing for at a state level. If Republicans are pushing for total abortion bans at a state level, why would that not be reflective of their interest at a national level? When has anyone pushing for a law at a state level been like, oh yeah, sure, but we don't really mind that that's not the case elsewhere? Smiley face, you know? You think Texas would settle for them having a completely closed border, but New Mexico has an open border? Like, do you think it's ever worked that way?
staked his position and made it very explicit. He wants this to be a state decision. States are going to make this determination themselves.
All right, let's talk about women voters more broadly. The Census Bureau estimates there are 22 million women between the ages of 20 and 40 who, for whatever reason, do not have children. What do you say to those women who hear some of your comments?
Yeah, agreed, Alec Gunter. No one actually believes in states' rights. Nobody. I mean, literally nobody does. It's only ever been a way of saying, we want this on a national level and we can't win that fight just yet, so instead we're going to kick it to the states so that the red states can push for it and we can use the political power that we gain from the normalization of these policies in the red states in order to push for it on a national level. You know? Like, never forget, the plan of the Confederate States of America, even before they were the Confederate States of America, was not just to sit pretty like they were forever, you know? It's always us or them. If you disagree fundamentally on a moral issue, whether it be slavery or the right to choose or apartheid or Jim Crow laws or whatever else, everyone who says they want it decided at the state level, they're basically just saying they want the worst choice to win. Otherwise, they would just say, affirmatively, I want the good thing for everyone. It's not a cultural difference. It's just right or wrong.
Including childless cat lady comments, which you've been asked about, but who feel as though you won't represent them.
Well, I'd say, first of all, I will represent you. I want to be the vice president for the whole country, and I want to represent everybody. And yes, I made a sarcastic comment years ago that I think that a lot of Democrats have willfully misinterpreted.
He defended it just a few weeks ago. When he was asked about it, he doubled down on it. We literally covered that on stream. It wasn't just like a one-off thing. Being like a weird incel who hates women is a core part of his like conservative framework.
But what I've simply said is that I think that it's really a profound change that's happened in our country where we become anti-family, and I would like to change that. And I think if you talk to young women, whether they have children or don't want to have children, what you consistently hear is that a lot of young women feel like they don't have options. I saw this with my own wife, who's a working mother, who's a very, very accomplished litigator. She has 3 beautiful kids and always felt like she was having to balance being a good mom with being the kind of litigator that she wanted to be. I just want women to have more choices. I've seen that very personally in my own.
You know, except for like with regards to reproductive care. What? You saying that childless people are sociopaths and that, you know, your opposition is crazy cat ladies who don't have children and don't care about the future of this country? That's you saying you want women to have options?
Family, and I think it's something that is broken about our country.
Let me zoom out a little bit then. You're calling it a sarcastic comment.
Sure.
And yet, some women, and you got the feedback in real time, felt like it was a gut punch to them personally. Do you regret making that comment?
Yeah, keep in mind, nobody would ever make this comment about a guy. Nobody does. There is no push in that direction. No one is like, oh yeah, childless cat guy. Nobody says this. Nobody cares. The hit to women, the idea, oh, your eggs are dried up, you're, you know, undesirable and you don't have kids, that's like a targeted insult, you know?
Look, I regret certainly that a lot of people took it the wrong way, and I certainly regret that the DNC and Kamala Harris lied about it.
Do you regret what?
I'm sorry that you felt that way. I'm sorry that you interpreted my comment the way you did.
You said, Senator.
Look, Kristen, I'm going to say things from time to time that people disagree with. I'm a real person. I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to say
Vosh-ass apology coming out right here.
Things sarcastically, and I think that what's important is that we focus on the policy. There are certainly going to be things that I say if I'm elected vice president that people are going to say, well, I wish he had said that differently. I think it's most important to actually be the person I actually am and to say those sarcastic comments were made in the service of a real substantive point. This country has become too anti-family. It's too expensive to afford a house. It's too expensive to afford groceries.
And somehow this like ties back into calling childless people sociopaths, saying they're not invested in the future of this country and making fun of them. Somehow there's a relationship between these factors, you know?
Donald Trump and I want to change that, and unless we get better leadership, we're not gonna.
But again, just very quickly, given that people have told you directly.
She's been great, by the way. I gotta say, just credit where credit's due. She's been doing a good job keeping the heat on.
Spoken out, have said that they were offended, they were hurt by those comments. Do you wish you never made those childless cat lady comments?
I think that it's much more important for me to just be a normal human being who sometimes says things that people disagree with. I have a lot of regrets, Kristen, but making a joke 3 years ago is not at the top 10 of the list.
All right.
That's crazy. Wait, what are your regrets then? Wait, hold on. What skeletons do you have in your closet, JD Vance? A couch? I don't think he regrets that. Wouldn't it be so easy of him to have like a human moment and be like, I really did interpret it as a joke and that's how I intended it, but it's clear to me that a lot of people were upset by my comment and I don't want to make them feel like I won't represent them. So you know what? I do regret making that comment. I wish I'd phrased my thoughts better. Like, would that not be, I don't know. Maybe they're just giving up on the woman vote anyway.
Right. Another big topic in this race is immigration. There has been a lot of discussion about Donald Trump's plans for mass deportation. Yeah. According to one estimate,
more just than casually, just like the largest deportation it would be the largest deportation in a Western country ever since World War II, wouldn't it? I'm trying to think what else would even come close. 20 million people. You'd be looking at like, I'm sure India and China have hit bigger numbers than that, but in terms of like the West, even the Trail of Tears. Oh yeah, there were not 20 million people on the Trail of Tears, not even close. I don't think there were even that many of them alive. Totally different Coconut Gang, but for reasons that have to be discussed later. Wait, Trump said 20 million? Yeah, 20 million. 20 million. Who does he plan to deport? The line is all undocumented immigrants. Where do you get that number? That's their number. That's the number they're saying. I'm getting that number from Donald Trump. He is likely exaggerating on the 20 million. It's likely 12.5 million from what I've seen. Okay, but what does it mean that he's exaggerating? Like what do you think that suggests? You know?
11 million U.S. citizens live in households with mixed immigration status, including more than 5 million children. If you and former President Trump were elected, would you separate families as a part of your mass deportation effort?
Well, we have to start with the foundational issue here, which is we have 25 million illegal aliens in this country.
25 million? Oh, shit. Every time you look away, the number of undocumented immigrants goes up. I thought the number was 11 million. That was the number that I used a few years ago. It's 11 to 13, something like that, and now it's up to 25?
Right now because Kamala Harris has refused to do her job.
Very quickly, DHS says it's much lower. It's closer to 8 million.
I think
8 million, sure, 8, 11, 13, I don't know. They're undocumented. It's kind of hard to count them.
No, where do you get the 25 million from?
Well, I think the 25 million are the people that should have been deported that maybe weren't deported, plus you had another 12 to 15 million that have come in since Kamala Harris. That's so made up completely. Okay, all right. So we have the real number plus like a fake extra number that we've added on, the Kamala Harris number.
Use that number for the record. They say it's closer to 8 to 10 million.
But I think there are reasons to think that DHS is underestimating. Whatever the real number is, it's way too high, right?
You think that DHS is underestimating? Where are you getting your numbers from? Facebook? Oh yeah, I think that we're getting an underestimation by like a power of 3 from the organization created to handle this. And 9/11. Where do I get my figures from? Wouldn't you like to know?
Millions upon millions of illegal immigrants that have come in just since Kamala Harris became the border czar a few years ago.
She was put in charge of the root causes of migration.
Well, the root causes of migration, I would say, Kristen, is that Kamala Harris refuses to do her job as border czar. And let's just start there. I want to answer.
Again, the border czar thing isn't a real. That's not a real thing. It's not. It's completely fake thing. It's fake. It's not a real thing.
Your question, but I think it's important to sort of sequence this in the right way. So if you want to get control of the illegal immigration problem, you have to stop the bleeding. You have to stop so many people from coming here illegally in the first place, and that means undoing everything that Kamala Harris did practically on day one of the administration. You have to reimpose deportations. You have to stop catch and release. Stop granting asylum to every single person who comes in here. And
they're not. That's not happening. None of this is happening. This is all completely fake and made up.
Says that they need asylum, and stop granting mass parole. These policies are why we have the immigration crisis that we have.
Wait, mass parole? What do you mean? We don't have the facilities to house millions of people while waiting for the data shows the vast majority of undocumented immigrants who are seeking asylum status return for their court-appointed hearings.
So I think focus on fixing the problem. Before we even fix the problem, we've got to stop the problem from getting worse.
And as you know, President Biden passed a series of executive actions, and illegal border crossings are now at their lowest levels in about 5 years, so much so that Greg Abbott is no longer busing people to other cities. But let me ask you this fundamental question,
please.
Fundamental question. Will families be separated under your mass deportation?
And again, because you made a point here, I do want to answer this question about families and about deportations. But
by which I mean I don't want to answer that, because that would make me look really bad when you think about, like, on the human level, what removing 20 million people from this country would look like. You all know removing 20 million people would involve, like, Holocaust level logistics, right? We're talking camps, we're talking concentration camps in every southern state that borders Mexico. We're talking rail yards, we're talking photos of naked men, women, and children in like those reflective blankets being pushed out of cattle cars that they were, like, pushed into shoulder to shoulder so that they can be marched in single file over to a camp. Like, we're talking like a 20 million. You know, normally when you want to get rid of 20 million people, we're talking like mass graves and rivers turned red here. Like, if we're talking like 20 million people removed without resorting to that tactic, we're talking Holocaust level logistics management. It'd be like Japanese internment, but 100 times, 1,000 times more. It'd be beyond. Is a nationwide train system really worth it? Guys, I just came up with an idea for how to pitch high-speed rail to Republicans. Is it worth it? Yes. I want high-speed rail. Yes. It's brilliant.
You made this point that border crossings are lower. Border crossings at the southern border are lower because the Harris administration is sending more immigrants through the ports of entry. So instead of coming through the southern border, they're now being flown at taxpayer expense to the ports of entry all over our country. The number of illegal crossings, Kristen, this is a really important point, they're not any lower. They're just shuffling how the people are coming into the country in the first place.
It's not true, and I don't even care to dispute it because I don't care. I don't care about undocumented immigration. We should just make them all citizens. Or give them like a little few years. Our immigration system is so stupid, man. You have no idea.
This is very important.
They're able to process them more efficiently, but Greg Abbott's not setting them to other
Kristen,
states.
I don't want a border czar who makes it more efficient for illegal immigrants to come into this country. That's why.
If they're being processed and allowed into the country, they're not illegal immigrants, J.D. Vance. If they're being processed, they're actually legal immigrants. That's what the processing is.
We have the problem that we have.
Senator, to this question, because so many people want to know the answer to this. Will families be separated under your mass deportation?
Are you ready for the third pivot?
Policy.
I think that families are currently being separated, and you're certainly going to have to deport some people in this country.
Wait. Families are what? Families are currently being so the answer is yes. So yes, you will separate. Yeah, of course. Like, obviously the answer is yes. But what?
Now I think you start with I think it's you start with the most violent criminals in our country. Those people need to be deported. That's where you focus.
We already do deport violent criminals who are found and arrested and they're undocumented are often deported already. What does that have to do with anything?
Federal resources. I think you, of course, have a number of children who are currently living with drug cartel members, not actually their families. We need to, of course, find...
You have to remember that, like, because of years and years of priming from the Republicans, the median Republican mind thinks that an undocumented immigrant is an MS-13 member, and that every child who is brought up from the South is, like, being trafficked in to win them sympathy when they confront border security. Like, they don't think there are any actual families coming up. You know, they think they literally think it's 20 million cartel members. That's not even a joke. If you wonder why Republicans are the way they are, to a lot of these, like, 75-year-olds who don't talk to their children or grandchildren, they actually do think there are like 20 million cartel militants who have been securing like every corner of this country and are ready at any moment from declaration from the Mexican president or whatever to take over the country.
Their families and get them back to their families. But it's very interesting here because what Kamala Harris says is that Donald Trump wants to separate families. Kamala Harris's policies have led to thousands upon thousands of migrant children living with sex traffickers and drug cartels. That is the consequence of her policies.
Incorrect. Just incorrect. Also, if those children were in the hands of sex traffickers and drug cartels when entering the country, wouldn't they have been in the hand of those people before entering the country? Like, theoretically, shouldn't these children be safer in America because now they can benefit from America's much greater level of police security than Mexico? Like, if those children are in the care of sex traffickers and cartel members, wouldn't it be better for them to be in America where they could go to a police officer and the police officer could theoretically, in a good country, be like, oh, we should get you to safety and put you in an orphanage or something while we arrest your caretakers? Whereas in Mexico, if you go to a police officer, in a lot of places, they'll be like, oh, your caretakers are cartel members? That's cool, me too.
There's not a policy to separate families. There's not a policy to separate families.
Oh, if you know that your policies will lead to family separation, you don't get to claim. Kristen, this is important. Kamala Harris cannot claim that she doesn't know that her policies are leading to family separation. They are, and everybody knows it, and she has to take responsibility for that. That's what real leadership is.
There are some families who have.
It'd be like Adolf Hitler going on the news and people asking like, hey, so about those death camps, won't you be killing Jews? And Hitler's like, you cannot tell me that under the Weimar government, there weren't Jews dying to police brutality. In the ghettos of Berlin, there were Jews being beaten. Now you're going to tell me, like, you can't come after me. And then, like, next year, 6 million Jews die. That's basically where we're at, I guess.
Been separated, as you say, some because their parents are criminals. But of course, under the Trump administration, there was a zero tolerance policy, which is an actual policy. But let's move on.
No, please,
because we're running out of time.
Because this is so important.
We are running out of time.
There was a zero. I'll give you more time. There was a zero tolerance policy during the Trump administration, and that led to less family separation than under.
How do you deal with this, dude? Past a point, you should just have a giant red button that you get to hit that completely mutes the other person and deafens them and also explodes their head. Actually, Donald Trump reduced the tariffs with China. Donald Trump reduced the family separation by employing the policy that explicitly separated families, even though hundreds of children were never reunited with their families. Actually, Donald Trump has black hair. He should be slimed. He should be slimed. He should be slimed.
Kamala Harris's border policies. That's what's so striking about this. Actually enforcing our border is the most humane thing for children and certainly for American citizens.
But I don't hear you denying that families will be separated. Let's move on to something that Donald Trump said in North Carolina and yet again Friday night. He said, quote, our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat because we have all the votes you need. You can see it. Why is Donald Trump casting doubt on the election before it's even happened?
I don't think that's what Donald Trump is doing.
Well, that's what he's doing. That's what he says here. We need to make sure they don't cheat.
I think that what he's saying is that we want to pursue a set of policies in the Republican Party that make it easier for every legal ballot to be cast and counted, but make it harder for illegally cast ballots to be counted. Now,
the mythical illegally cast ballots that have never been found, you know? For all the fuss about them, there's just never been any evidence found.
we can disagree about how many of those there are, whether there are a few hundred, a few thousand, maybe more.
Well, we can disagree. We can disagree on how many fakely casted ballots there are. Trump thinks there are millions. The evidence shows there are none. You know, like somewhere between millions and zero, there's a number of how many illegally casted ballots there are, and we can debate the specifics. We can make up numbers if we want.
But just in the last week, okay, so just in the last week, once in Arizona and once in Pennsylvania, there were major court wins that make our ballot process more secure and more effective. I think that's what Donald Trump is talking about, is we have to pursue, sometimes through litigation, sometimes through better policy at the state or national level, a set of rules that make sure every ballot is legally counted.
Well,
or in other words, we need to pursue by making new laws and by getting our activist judges to levy new jurisprudence, that the rules are changed so that we win.
It's very different from your message, which is, you said, and I'll quote you back to yourself, we have to work as hard as possible to persuade Americans to vote for us. Are you on the same page as Donald Trump? Because, again, he seems to be casting doubt on the results of the election before it's even happened.
Of course we're on the same page, Kristen. We talk all the time, and I guarantee you, if you sat here and said, Mr. President, Donald Trump, do you believe that we need to do, that your campaign needs to persuade voters as much as possible? Of course he's going to say yes. That's not inconsistent with thinking that we need to pursue a set of approaches that make sure legal ballots get counted, illegal ballots don't get counted.
Do you have faith the 2024 election will be free and fair?
I do, Kristen. I do think it's going to be free and fair, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that happens. We're going to pursue.
What do you mean by that? If you think it's free and fair, then you think it's free and fair.
Pursue every pathway to make sure, again, legal ballots get counted. But I feel very good about where we are. I think we're going to win this race, and I think we're going to win it in a very good election.
All right. Senator J.D. Vance,
thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Likewise.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for watching.
What a demon, man. What a demon. A grinning little freak. It really is crazy how all of YouTube comment sections are Republicans, because only Republicans are boomer enough to use YouTube comment sections. If she interviews Kamala this hard, she would fall apart. This narrative that Kamala Harris can't stand up to interviews is coming from where exactly? Where is it coming from? Kamala Harris did debates and interviews in the 2020 primary. She's not like an untested, you know, bots probably too. Yeah, probably. Sounds like Trump's dropping out of the debate. Really? I watched ABC Fake News this morning. Both lightweight reporter Jonathan Karl's ridiculous and biased interview of Tom Cotton, who is fantastic, and their so-called panel of Trump haters. And I ask, why would I do the debate against Kamala Harris on that network? Will panelist Donna Brazile give the questions to the Marxist candidate like she did for crooked Hillary Clinton? Will Kamala's best friend who heads up ABC do likewise? Where's little George Slopadopoulos hanging out now? Will he be involved? They've got a lot of questions to answer. Why did Harris turn down Fox, NBC, CBS, and even CNN? Stay tuned. This isn't necessarily him dropping out. It just sounds like he's whining. Your Trump sucks? My tummy's full of water. I don't want to put the effort in. There's Belarusian troops massing on the Ukrainian border under the guise of training. Good. Things have been too easy for Ukraine lately. Got to keep it interesting. If he does drop out, would we get a bump at the polls? If Donald Trump drops out of the debate? Not sure. Trump's own store is full of merch from China. Oh, God. Oh, yeah, of course. Everything's from China. Yeah. To be fair, Vosh, you do remember watching Kamala's interviews in the past few years, right? Especially with Charlemagne. It's pretty embarrassing. Yeah, but Kamala Harris seems to have taken on a very different tone since, you know, since the happening happened, right? Very, very different now to how she's been as the VP. Basically silent as the VP, you know? Yeah, maybe she's locking in.